What's up, guys? Working on the Jeep again today. Kind of took a couple of steps backwards on this thing. Working on this Dana 60, it was pretty rough. The kingpins were locked up on the other side. It was froze up solid. I couldn't even turn the damn wheel, the 42-inch tire on there by hand. So it was a pain in the butt to get that all apart. I got it all knocked apart, and you got to put wheel bearings in here, kingpin kits, and a bunch of other stuff, spindle bearings and seals and wheel seals. But anyways, that's what I'm working on today. Try to get this thing buttoned back up and moved to the rear end. Got my high steer arms and stuff too, so I'm gonna get my steering mocked up and get it all put together. I did use a 6-degree shim on this casting to get the steering, I guess the caster kicked back just a little bit. I think I ended up with about 5 or 6 degrees caster, and the pinion angle looks decent, at least it's not pointed down to the ground. But and then the other side, I had to make a spacer to make up for these 2 shims on this side. This is kind of what you end up with. You gotta have a shim on top and bottom so your plate can stay the same and the holes can all make it through there and everything. But what I ended up doing was making a spacer for this side to make up all of that difference. So didn't really have a choice, kind of just had to do that. That casting has that flat casted in there, so can't do much with that. It's gotta have to use a shim, or if you're using leaf springs, that's the way you got to do it. So those are steel shims. They're just zinc coated. I think I got those from WFO or something like that. They were, I don't remember how much they were, about 17-18 bucks a piece, I think. These steering knuckles are pretty rough, so I run a file over the top and bottom sides and tapped all the dang holes. So hopefully everything goes together smooth. I got new studs for the steer arms, and also had to do a little bit of work to the that cap for the bottom kingpin. I don't know where it's at over here, but it got beat on a little bit, so I filed it down, chewed it up a little bit. So hopefully that all works out. Alright guys, we're going to fast forward just a little bit. I got this front end assembled, and this is kind of what I did here. I think I told you about those shims already in there, and the height difference of this casting was a little bit taller than the spring perch over there, so I had to put a shim over there. Anyways, these high steer arms came from 4-Wheel Supply. It's just a guy, I think he does this stuff on the side, I believe. But arms look pretty good. They have the 10-degree taper off here to account for the steering knuckle leaning in, so it keeps your tie rods straight and level. And also I got the H1 offset, and for the H1 wheels it sets them in just a little bit. I'm not using H1 wheels, but the main reason I did that was to help with the Ackerman angle. Kind of kicks my tie rod. My tie rod's in the back, on the back side of the axle, but it keeps it kind of in line with the kingpin towards the center of the rear diff, and makes the inside wheel turn sharper than the outside one, or it helps with that anyways. And then my drag link, of course, is in front still. I just have a double-sided arm on this side, and the other side is just a single-sided arm. But hopefully it all works out pretty good. I have a decent amount of space here. I mean, it's not a whole lot, but it's, it's 4 or 5 inches probably. I don't have a whole lot of up travel because these springs are just a stock Wagoneer spring, and they, I don't want to de-arch them too much when I wheel. I'm going to put a bump stop in there so I don't overstretch those backwards. Most of my travel is going to be down with these. You can see they're already fairly flat. If I need to go taller with the Jeep, I'll just add a lift spring or something, or have a new main leaf made with a little bit more arch to it. But that's it. Pretty much done. All I got to do is relocate my shocks. I think I'm going to cut the tower off and move it up here. The frame's pretty flat right there, and either that or just make some hoops or something. But you know, I don't have much room for the shocks, so I'll have to go just right in the center of the axle, mainly because on this other side I have the two arms to play with, so I just have to plop it right in the middle. So anyways, now I'm working on a nv4500 Chevrolet one. What I'm trying to do is bolt my Dana 300 to the back of it. I ended up having to cut a 1/2 inch off the shaft. I just did that a minute ago. Still kind of hot. I had to cut 1/2 inch off of there so the Dana 300 will bolt up, and so hopefully this works out okay. I did have to put a 32 spline input shaft into the Dana 300, but I might show that once I get it all bolted together. And the Jeep has a 4-speed in it right now, and it worked pretty good with my old setup, but I need an overdrive now because my diff gears are 538s and they used to be 373s, so gotta have overdrive. The pitman arm I used was, I believe it's off of an XJ, and it was either a Wrangler one or an XJ, I'm not sure, but it was around 2.5 to 3 inches of drop, and it left my drag link pretty dang level. You know, it's down just a little bit, but I think it's sitting here crooked actually. It's a little lower on the passenger side, but anyways, that worked out pretty decent. And I turned it lock to lock, and it does give me full lock in both directions. And I think the pitman arm is around just a little less than 5.5 inches, you know, from the tie rod to the center of the steering shaft there. And then I had him drill my holes 6 inches from center of the kingpin to, you know, the center of my tie rod. So it left me with about I don't know what they say, you need your pitman arm about 90% of what your steering arm should be to end up with the correct ratio, you know, and that way you have full steering, and everything turns left and right equal amounts and everything like that. So this was the best steering I've set up so far. My old setup with the Dana 44s was pretty good, but this one's even better with the tie rod behind the axle. So still learning on this stuff, but this one should be pretty good. All right, a couple things to note about this nv4500 and the bolt pattern. The Dana 300, the way it was clocked, it would have been, you know, clocked way up with the transfer case sticking up like this. That's how the bolt hole pattern lines up with the Dana 300. So what I'm going to do, I'm trying to cheap out and not buy the $600 adapter, you know, from Advanced Adapters. But so what I'm going to do is clock the whole case down one whole hole, you know, and it will pretty much put my transfer case just below level, and all my shifters will clear the side of the case. The only problem doing that is, like, I think it's this bolt hole won't line up. The other 5 will line up whenever you turn it one hole like that, but and only in that direction. If you turn it the other direction, then you have a couple of holes that won't line up. But anyways, the way I'm doing this is I'll have 5 holes. I could waller this hole. It's about half a hole off. I could waller it out, but I think I'm just going to leave it alone and just put 5 bolts in there to be fine. And then also I had to cut off the input shaft, or the output shaft, like I told you. It just did not allow enough space. The new input gear didn't allow enough space for that output shaft to come all the way sticking out. It actually has to be in just a little bit. And so I got the cover glued back on, got the input shaft installed, 32 spline Dana 300, and so we'll bolt it up and we'll just have one bolt hole that's not quite lined up. So here you go, a little bit of extra info that I figured out on my own. Also wanted to note that the spline depth on this is, I don't remember what it was, about 1.3 inches or something like that. And with me cutting off the output shaft of the nv4500, it's still longer, you know, than it still has full spline engagement. So, you know, me cutting those little bit of splines off didn't hurt anything. It still goes all the way in there, and in fact, you can't really see it very good, but the splines don't go all the way to the bottom of this. You know, the shaft actually sticks past the splines in there about a 1/4 inch. So everything seems to be lining up okay. I have plenty of spline engagement and should work out all right. But if you wanted to know what it looks like, there's what the drop is. You can see the transmission hangs well below than the transfer case, but still drops down a little bit. Hopefully, I'm sure I'll have to cut some of the body out. I've already had to cut some of it out for this setup that I had before, but there's already a big hole in the floor, but I'll just make the floor go around it, you know. That's a stock Chevy nv4500 bolted to a Dana 300. One thing is I don't have that one bolt hole in there, but I'm not worried about it. The rest of them all lined up, no spacers, no clocking rings. All I had to do was trim 1/2 inch off the shaft. It's a little bit longer than the Dodge nv4500, but I would have had to change the main shaft and the tail housing, and it would have been about almost 2 inches shorter that way, but then my shifters would have interfered. You know, they would have all been moved up, and I don't know if I could have made all that work. But this was easier, the cheapest thing to do for me. Pretty much all I had to do was add a 32 spline input gear and transfer case. So that's it, pretty excited. I will be getting to linking the back soon. I got to get this transmission put in there, and so stay tuned if you want to see my thoughts on linking the back of this thing. So I'm just going to put TJ coils in the back, and I just got some generic stuff from Barnes, you know, universal tabs and whatnot, a truss for the 14 bolt, and a couple of those Euro joints. Most of the joints I'm going to make out of the bushings, just standard bushings, you know, DOM sleeves. This thing's not going to have a ton of wheel travel because it's fairly short, you know. But so that's the way I'm gonna do it. Just gonna kind of keep it mild Jeep, so I can still drive it on the road and get around good. Just want it to be tough son of a bitch. So there you go.